Hello, so my name is Dina Jacobsen and I'm a reporter with Reuters in Copenhagen. So with me today I have Mads Nipper, the CEO of the world's largest offshore wind developer, Ørsted. Mads took the helm of the company late last year, and we're speaking in connection with the Reuters Global Energy Transition events. So I'm particularly happy that Mads has agreed to join us today. Because Ørsted has actually made the transition from being an oil, gas and coal company to now a pure play renewable energy company. So hello, Mads. Thank you.
Hello, how are you? Good to see you, Stine.
Great to see you, thanks. Well, let's just jump right at it, right?
Yes.
You're taking the helm at a very pivotal moment for both the renewable industry and for Ørsted. You have set a target to more than quadruple your installed capacity over the next decade. But I mean, more broadly speaking, what is sort of the status of the energy transition seen from your chair? I mean, where are we at, and what is the next big challenge to achieve your own vision of a world which runs entirely on green energy?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, there are many good things to say. I mean, first and foremost, we are really seeing the build out of renewables accelerate, and not just in terms of what actually happens, but also the 2030 ambitions that are put out by several nations such as US, EU, and many other countries that are saying now we are committing to a path, not just by 2050, where most are committing to a net zero path, but also by 2030. And even broken down to, so this is specifically what it means for offshore, this is specifically what it means for our ambitions on green hydrogen and so on. And the great news is that is now being followed by policy actions, whether that is extension of tax credits in the US, relatively fast. We need to be faster. So that means that the entire coherence of what needs to be true for us to have a much more massive build out of renewable energy and an infrastructure that can cope with it means that availability of land, seabed, consenting processes, safety for making long-term investment decisions, and not least that we also get resilient grids around the world that can handle this much higher share of renewable energy. That is still work that to a large extent needs to be done.
Okay, thanks. Because I guess it would be fair, at least to say for offshore wind, that there is a mismatch between these very ambitious climate targets set by politicians, which you also mentioned, and the actual capacity in companies' project pipelines. You mentioned a range of things which needs to be addressed. What would you say is sort of the biggest issue to go on and tackle right now, which really needs to be improved in order to make this work?
Well, I think the grid upgrades in general, because that's across all technologies, whether it's solar PV, whether it is onshore wind, whether it's offshore wind, or more integrated solutions. Those grid upgrades need to happen. But it is hard to point to just one thing, because I would also say that for offshore wind, having sufficient availability of seabed that is even remotely affordable, that is just one of the things that's really vital, not just for the companies and developers to ensure that we have financials in developing it, but also that because the world has now set, even excluding China, 170 gigawatt installed capacity by 2030, and we are sort of in the 20s now. So it means we need to build out in 9 years. We need to build out up to 150 gigawatts more. And since these are long lead time projects, we need to award and firm up in probably around 6 years another 140 to 50 gigawatts. And that means that we cannot allow ourselves to be slow. We cannot have these postponements. We cannot have long and unpredictable consenting processes. So that specifically for offshore is something that needs to be worked on together between regulators and companies, because we are not just passing on the challenge to regulators. We're prepared to lean in and engage to whatever extent needed.
Okay, so you're saying that governments will need to make more areas available for offshore wind farms. That's what I hear you say. Do you think there is a willingness to actually do this? I mean, there is a lot of talk about the green energy transition, but as you say, we need to see action. Do you think some politicians have been too slow in about awarding these seabed leases, for example? And do you think that even if they speed up now, is it realistic to achieve these things that you mentioned? I mean, it's quite some big numbers you throw out there.
Yeah, it's always easy to be wise retrospectively on Monday morning quarterbacking, as the Americans call it. Yes, in hindsight, many of us have probably been too slow. But I think to take the optimistic view, yes, it is still possible. And yes, there is an industry who has geared up substantially in terms of capacity, and that is not just the developers, of which Ørsted is at both a developer and a utility, but also an entire supply chain that I believe is ready and preparing to handle that growth. So what we need to do as an industry to say is where are those most important bottlenecks? And yes, there can be something around, can we gear up an entire supply chain? But I really think it is first and foremost about ensuring that both the regulatory schemes, but even more important, consent availability of relatively easy consentable seabed, that for offshore specifically, is something that needs to happen, and needs to happen quite urgently.
Okay, and you were also mentioning sort of the grid constraints, that's of course also something that is often discussed in the industry. Who is it that is going to invest in upgrading the grids in order to, make it possible for green power to actually play a bigger role and also, get into harder to abate sectors?
Yeah, it will have to be obviously the transmission owners, and these are most often owned by the countries and states, and this is a prerequisite. But it's always, I mean, it's a big undertaking because it's typically very expensive, and it's something which is hard to make a business case for. So, but if we are to handle up to 90 within the next couple of decades, up to 90% renewable energy with the intermittence that naturally comes with renewable energy, then this is something that needs to happen. So both in terms of grid upgrades, but also finding new intelligent solutions, including storage and digital technologies that will enable us to have a stable grid, even with that intermittency as a sort of almost unavoidable thing to come with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that's, I mean, also why you're venturing into green hydrogen, for example. I mean, could you perhaps explain us a bit what is it that your customers are asking from you that you're not able to offer today? I mean, for example, I mean, you're talking about combining different technologies and getting it all into the grid.
Yeah, I'll just, before I specifically comment on green hydrogen, allow me to also just more specific, just comment on customers in general. Because typically, and again, if I stay with the example of offshore wind, which is not all Ørsted does, but if I stay with that example, typically the customers have been states or countries that have said, we are now sort of auctioning or awarding sort of a major project to go into the national grid. But we are seeing an emerging market of especially large corporates, whether they are industrial companies or technology giants, who in and of their own right want to drive their decarbonization journey. So I also foresee that on top of the 170 gigawatts that I just talked about, that are the sort of combined national ambitions, there will be a need for additional capacity for corporates to add on top of that, for those who can electrify, and leading to more directly to your question, for green hydrogen, and not least the green fuels you can make based on green hydrogen, such as green ammonia, e-methanol, or something like this. There will be a need for even further renewable capacity, and that will also take both seabed and capacity at developers. So this is something that probably actually comes on top.
But we do see. How many gigawatts are we talking about? Sorry, could you?
I would not know, but it's a significant. I mean, it's a significant double-digit amount. This is a market that we see shaping. And since everybody's very focused on additionality, meaning that if a company buys renewable energy, they want to be able to document that we actually expand the renewable capacity, and this is something that we are all very aware of, namely to ensure we avoid greenwashing so that we have real substance behind what we do on our decarbonization journeys. But more specifically on to your question, that I think there are sectors that cannot electrify, either because it's just technologically not possible yet, or just because the nature of the business is just not something that seems to be possible to electrify. And the most obvious examples of that are heavy transport, such as shipping. You cannot have an ocean tanker with electric batteries. That's probably far into the future. So we need fuels based on renewable energy. That's doable. Same thing with aviation. It will take a while. Heavy transport, high temperature processes such as steel industry, refineries, chemical companies. So there are many examples of sectors that need renewable hydrogen and green fuels in order to also decarbonize. Otherwise, they will need to continue to burn fossil fuels, which luckily very few people want to continue to do.
Yeah, but when do you have an estimate of when we will see commercially viable solutions? I mean, because there is a lot of, again, there's a lot of talk, and green hydrogen is kind of a sort of a hype at the moment. I know there's, of course, I mean, projects being built right now, pilot projects at least. But can you give us just enough? I mean, when is this going to be realistic?
I'll give you a short and long answer. The short answer, towards the end of the decade, is when we will see something at scale. And what can make that faster and slower is what kind of interplay will there be between regulators and companies within this space. Because in many ways you can actually compare it to where offshore wind was 10 or 15 years ago. It was actually not a really competitive technology, but courageous decision makers, including politicians in my home country, Denmark, chose to say, we will now, through sort of getting transparency of what will you be able to sell your green power for in the coming many years, that gives a certainty that developers and utilities make the long-term investments at scale. And scale means that the technology becomes more competitive. And then now, as of today, offshore wind is more affordable than coal-fired power. But that would never have happened if somebody did not have the choice to say, we will give you a guarantee that you can sell your power at these prices. So rather than seeing that as a cost if you're a regulator, you should see it as an investment, which I think for wind power in Denmark, we are recognizing that investment has paid itself back many times due to a very strong position. And we encourage that politicians around the world, but also certainly both in Denmark and EU, but also other places in the world, they say, in order to bridge the cost gap there is between green hydrogen and fossil hydrogen today, that's up to a factor of 4. There needs to be a bridging period where that goes away in order for the industry to gain scale. And when it gains scale, it will be competitive. So it's very similar in many ways.
Okay, so the wind industry was built on these generous subsidy schemes. So what I'm hearing you saying now is that subsidies is also needed in order to make this hydrogen economy fly.
For a period of time, yes.
Okay, and when do you think that? I mean, you said that offshore wind is now competitive with coal. When will it be competitive with, for example, natural gas?
I think it is very close. I mean, we are seeing that renewable energy at large. I mean, today, solar PV is already. I mean, that's currently the cheapest. Where we have the solar resources, which is not everywhere in the world, but that is a very affordable energy. But both onshore and offshore are indeed competitive as well, and those cost curves will continue to go down. So I have no doubt, and I think very few people have any doubt, that as soon as we can scale those technologies even further, there will be no need for fossil fuels to produce to produce power. So now the next battle, a
decade here as well, or a couple of years, or
maximum a decade.
Okay. Just one question, because when we're talking about the oil and gas industry, we have seen that competition is heating up in the renewable space, and you see big oil players like BP and Equinor entering the space. Do you see a risk? I mean, you're also talking about that there should be available seabed leases, but they should of course also be awarded at a good price. I guess you would think. Do you see a risk that there could be put downward pressure, that there could be put pressure on, for example, auction prices, as some of these players who have very deep pockets are willing to pay a lot to gain a foothold in the market?
Yeah, no, that's a very real example, because that we have seen that, and it is happening. So if we look at, for example, the lease round 4 in the UK, where seabed was awarded, that was at very high prices. I should not be the judge of what is right and wrong, but the very real concern we have is that if that price for example, seabed is driven up very substantially, one of two things is probably going to happen: either that the developers and utilities won't make money, or that it simply brings up the cost of offshore wind power, which would make the technology less competitive versus the less sustainable alternatives. Both of those scenarios are not good. So in a way, you could say that even though, I mean, it might sound like somebody who says, I don't want it to be expensive because I want to make more money. That's actually not our concern. Our concern is that if that inflation continues, it will eventually come to the disadvantage of the speed with which we accelerate the technology, or the competitiveness of the technology, which again will increase or decrease the speed. So it's actually out of a genuine concern that we should keep up pace and get a more and more competitive and affordable price for offshore wind power.
Okay, and do you think that it's realistic that these scenarios you mentioned, that they are playing out as you see it? I mean,
yes, short term we have seen it already, and it's a real and genuine concern. But I have reason to believe that, because there is political commitment to deliver the 170 gigawatts by 2030. We hear that very clearly from regulators around the world. And that also means that what I said is needed, namely especially seabed and consenting of those seabeds. Everybody will understand it's needed to make that available at a totally different scale than today. So, and we are seeing some of that now. There's up to 10 gigawatts of capacity being auctioned in Scotland, in ScotWind. We are expecting New York Bight to be an additional 7 gigawatts. And we see other countries that are not sort of awarding exclusive or auctioning it, but making it available for open development. We are starting to see that move faster already. And that means that when that happens, there's going to be, if you understand my analogy, there's going to be a different supply-demand balance in offshore. And that will naturally mean, as in any other economic theory, then prices will also normalize. That's our clear expectations. They probably won't go dramatically down, but if substantial amounts which will be needed to make available are there, then there's going to be, if I may use such a simple phrase, as there's going to be enough for everybody.
Okay, fair enough. Just a last question with regards to this theme, because as mentioned, some of these oil companies are looking to undergo sort of the same transition as you've done. I mean, they are doing it for different reasons, looking to diversify their portfolio, shareholder pressure. We see the Dutch court case, which, for example, are there any lessons learned, from Ørsted's transition that you would like to highlight? Sort of, what advice would you give to oil companies trying on this transition?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a fly into answering that question, I'll just say that seeing the oil majors deciding now to make that transformation is, if I look at it sort of from somebody who's passionate around a world that runs entirely on green energy, I absolutely love to see that happen, because that needs to happen. We cannot continue to use as much fossil fuel, and we need to make a dramatic shift. So one part of me is extremely happy about that happening. But obviously, as a CEO of a commercial undertaking, I'm not thrilled about the increase in competition. But all in all, it's a good thing. And that's also why we at Ørsted, we actually chose to publish a folder which is widely available to anybody who wants to see it at our website, ørsted.com. but there are sort of a number of really tangible advices from somebody who's gone through being one of the most fossil fuel intensive utilities in Europe to now 90+% based on renewable energy. And it is about having, just examples of that, having the courage to set a very bold ambition. We happened to meet ours long before we had set it to do. To have also the courage to lean in wholehearted, even though the business cases might be slightly more difficult to see, and to really make that, to make a choice that you really rally behind, rather than sort of taking it small steps, step by step. That is a much riskier strategy, and we could see that by having the courage to set a time-boxed and specific, very ambitious target, drove so many additional actions throughout the entire company. But for more granularity, feel free to dive into the description we have made. That is again publicly available, even because we want to see others doing the same as we are doing.
Thanks, Mads. I think we've used the time that you have kindly agreed to give us today. But just a final question. Can you ever envisage a scenario with 100% renewable power across Europe?
Yeah, at least very, very close to it. We can see that, for example, in Denmark, where we not only are one of the major operators of wind farms, but we are also operating combined heat and power plants. There will still be a fraction of that left, because we have committed to decarbonize our energy production completely by 2025. I believe that's the fastest of any sizable utility in the world. But there will still be a small need, for example, to ensure that there is stability in the grid, that we could be sort of need to use a limited amount of natural gas. So very close to 100% we can get, I'm confident. Whether that is then 97, 98, I don't know. But combined with carbon capture technologies, I am very convinced that Europe's energy consumption can be carbon neutral, and it can be it a lot faster than 2050 if we want to.
When would that be then?
Unfortunately, there are a lot more influential stakeholders to say that, but it would be possible at least 10 years ahead of time. But when it will happen, your guess is as good as mine.
Perfect. Thank you so much for taking your time today, Mads. It was a pleasure talking to you. Take care.
Thank you so much. Cheers. Thank you.
Bye.